Vox Day,
Mr. San Giorgio.
here we are again. Beginning of summer 2024. We live exciting year.
Yeah, there's that supposed old Chinese proverb about may you live in interesting times, and the times that we're currently in are, I think, beyond interesting. These are the times that are actually interesting when you're reading the history books.
So last week there was this organized debate between
Fake
President Biden and maybe fake challenger Trump. Who knows? What's your analysis of that?
My analysis of it is that this whole thing is just a charade.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of backroom negotiations and threats and positioning and posturing. You know, my contention, as you know, is that we're already well into World War III.
Of course. Yeah.
And that the sides are not necessarily what people understand them to be.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily, the Russian government against NATO per se, much less the Russian people versus the American people. But this is a massive war between what, for lack of a better term, we'll call clown world, and the various forces of the sovereign nations.
Mm-hmm.
We won't call them necessarily free. I don't think that you can necessarily describe most of the countries today as being anything that we historically understand as free.
People don't want to be free anyway.
That's true in general, but the point is that there's a fundamental difference between the nations that want to be sovereign, to have the right to make their own rules, live their own way, have a homogenous nation, and the clown world of the globalists that hides under many names, but these days usually goes by diversity and inclusivity, and it used to be multiculturalism and all that sort of thing. We all know what it is, even when we don't know exactly who it is, per se. And so what's happening in the States appears to be a coup of factions within the Democratic Party that want to get rid of the puppet Joe Biden. And of course, Joe Biden, there's at least 5 of them that I've personally witnessed.
You mean sosie, as we say in French, as we say in English?
Doubles?
Doubles.
Yeah, but
so it's an old thing. It's not just Saddam Hussein or
no.
Churchill had doubles.
We
know that.
Putin has doubles.
It goes a long way.
Yeah, and Trump has doubles.
Sure.
There's no question. I always thought it was interesting when that famous mugshot came out. The one that he's like, it's
a good one. It's a good shot.
It's not even a mugshot. Now, this may be betraying a little more personal information than I would necessarily like to betray, but they don't let you pose when they're taking your mugshot.
Yeah.
They might let a girl get away with smiling, but if it's not a straightforward, normal, try doing it at the passport office.
No.
If you strike a blue steel pose at the passport office, they'll tell you, yeah, very nice. Now stand up straight, stop smiling, and they'll take another picture.
Mm-hmm.
They absolutely do that with mugshots too. So that image that was released was obviously not.
It's marketing.
Yeah, it was
marketing. It's fair enough.
Which is fine, but the point is it wasn't a mugshot.
No, true.
And more importantly, it wasn't Donald Trump. If you look at a picture of Donald Trump, is the actual Donald Trump. It looked like him, but the man was clearly younger, had a different hairline, had a narrower face, and with Joe Biden, I've literally seen. You've probably seen too. You can see the memes of
the teeth,
the different Biden, the different teeth, the different ears, the one that is a mask. I think 2 of them have been masks.
Yeah, but that is in the sense, maybe people are not familiar to that, but it's a very old. I'm sure in ancient times they used the same tricks for assassination purposes, for security. 100%. I know for sure Churchill during World War II had several official comedians who dressed like him, wore haircut and makeup to make it look like him, so that when he was traveling to Tehran or other conference, maybe even Yalta, I'm not sure about that, they used these kind of doubles to prevent assassination, to prevent or to just create confusion with the enemies, for sure.
Right, and so what do you do when you've got a dementia-addled supposed politician?
Mm-hmm.
You've got your body doubles right there. You just send them in their place.
Yeah.
And they
didn't.
They make their speeches. Now, what was fascinating is that they appear to have taken the least capable, most incompetent Joe Biden and presented that on the biggest stage of his career.
So you're saying that some of the doubles also have dementia?
Oh, the one that appeared on the debate, that's the one that I call Biden number 5.
Okay, so the real Biden might just as well be dead.
No, excuse me. That's not Biden number 5. Biden number 5 is like the bent nose.
So where is the real one? He's probably dead or something. Where's Bin Laden?
I don't know. I mean,
it's weird.
It's possible that he's dead. It's also possible that he's just, people with dementia can live for 10 or more years.
I know. My father went through
no
that.
idea who they are. And so, a friend of mine, unfortunately, his mother, she lived for 10 years, not really knowing who she was and that sort of thing. So, Biden could be alive, if not exactly well, but just totally incapable of being seen in public.
So then one begs the question, who's ruling? Whose faction, is ruling, and what's going to happen between now and November? Right.
Well, it depends on which conspiracy theorists you listen to. But the big question, of course, is not, who is the candidate going to be and can he beat Trump? Because, we know for certain with the 2020 election that the U.S. elections are no longer real.
Mm-hmm.
They can, report whatever numbers they want to report. It doesn't matter what the polls say and that sort of thing. They'll just come up with a narrative to cover it. So, the question is, are they going to cheat again? Do they have the ability to cheat again? And on whose behalf will it be done? Now, my understanding is that Gavin Newsom was supposed to be the eventual successor,
mm-hmm.
but that was derailed because it came out that his wife had sex with Harvey Weinstein, his current wife.
No, who didn't?
Well,
didn't you? He asked me, but I was sick that day, so.
I didn't. I wasn't ever, hoping to be an Hollywood actress.
That's fine.
But anyhow, and then of course, being the governor of a state that's an absolute shit show, pretty much precludes you. There was a time when if you were the governor of California, you were automatically a candidate for U.S. president.
Like Reagan.
Yeah, Reagan. But even well after him. The governors that followed him were generally considered to be, major national players.
How far we've come when you think that California could elect someone like Reagan for almost 50 years ago.
Yeah. Now a Republican has no chance whatsoever.
Now it's like Haiti number 2.
Yeah, or the Aztec temple. I'm kind of surprised we don't have the Aztec temples being built yet.
Soon.
But the thing that's a little bit frightening about that is that California was always referred to as the bellwether state.
Mm-hmm.
As goes California, so goes America.
Wow.
And so if that's the case, we know that the fall of the U.S. as a political entity is certain.
I think it is, and your prediction of 2030 was way more accurate than mine of 2020.
Well, in fairness, I made it in 2004. I made it public in 2004. I actually, obviously, believe that. And the specific year was 2033.
Okay.
So we'll see how close that is. But what is interesting about that is that at the time that I made it, and it's public, you can look it up in the WorldNet Data Archives. At the time, every single person that wrote to me in response to that said, "You're crazy. Like, where is this coming from?" I mean, this was something that they couldn't even imagine the possibility of happening.
Yeah.
And now I've actually had people telling me, I think maybe you were a little optimistic. I don't think we have that long. Now, the thing about the collapse of empires is that they happen both slower and more quickly than you expect, and you can't.
And we're not prophets. I mean, we're setting trends and trying to understand what's happening. Right. No one knows for sure.
No, but one thing that we do know for sure is that World War III, it's not done, but it's over. In that, if you look at the industrial capacity of the Axis versus the Allies had about a 5 times manufacturing advantage over the Axis, because Germany was a
big manufacturing,
a production powerhouse. Japan, not so much. Italy, 0. Also not so much. Whereas the U.S. obviously was a giant in itself.
And so was the USSR.
And the USSR too.
Not in all aspects, but
right. And Britain,
on the ones that matters, yes.
And Britain did have some industrial
almost
capacity.
as big as Germany.
Right. But if you look at it now, China has 100 times the industrial capacity of the U.S.
Yes.
And Russia is has proven to be a formidable manufacturer.
Yeah.
And Iran is not a slouch. Iran is as large as any of the European countries, and the Persians are not Arabs.
Mm-hmm. Well, they're smart.
They're smart, and so they've got a pretty formidable manufacturing capacity of their own. A lot of the drones that Russia's building are actually Iranian design.
Yeah.
And so,
Israel probably won't be able to fight Hezbollah. Is not even finished fighting Hamas.
Yeah, that's wildly confusing in that why they think that
widening the front will help when you can't finish what's...
Well, it smacks of desperation.
Unfortunately for them, I must say.
The problem that the Israelis have, in my opinion, the challenge that they face, is that they don't know how much longer they can rely on assistance from the U.S. They've already seen the inadequacy of U.S. support for Ukraine. And, they're learning that they bet on the wrong horse.
Yeah, it looks like a gambling thing. Like, let's double down so that maybe it will become such a mess that eventually the U.S. will have to fight the war for us.
Right, but the problem is
they can't.
The U.S. can't do it, and I think that realization has begun to penetrate the very thick skulls of the strategists of Clown World.
Thus, panic.
Yes, because Simplicius, who I really enjoy reading and who does a great job at his analysis, he pointed out an important observation that the tone of the various U.S. and EU politicians and their media organs, like The Economist and all the foreign affairs, all that their tone has suddenly changed. They're no longer triumphalist. Mm-hmm. They're no longer repeating the rote confidence of Ukraine's ultimate victory. And it's become very, very obvious that something has changed. And what Simplicius suspects, and I tend to agree, is that the fact that North Korea has now come in firmly on the side of Russia, and Russia has made it clear that it's welcoming North Korea as an ally. It's a complete game changer because
Oh yes.
North Korea is actually a manufacturing powerhouse. And in fact, if I recall correctly, only about a third of their military factories were even in use 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And already, I think they've added something like 80 factories to start producing ammunition. You know, they've delivered millions of shells to Russia already. And so, you know, it's pretty clear that there's a possibility, and we've talked about the three fronts previously. You got the Ukrainian front, you've got the Taiwanese front, South Pacific front, and you've also got the Middle Eastern front.
Yeah.
Well, now it's looking like there's going to be a Korean front.
And having an alliance means that any crazy attack from NATO against Russia automatically triggers a war in Asia.
Correct.
In Korea, which is one of the biggest manufacturing powers of civilian and electronic equipment in the world.
Well, and not only that, but Korea is the second largest shipbuilder.
Of course.
After China. And so, you know, that's something that the U.S. was hoping to rely on in the absence of its own shipbuilding manufacturing. Well, how many ships is South Korea going to be able to build if it's overrun or even just under attack from North Korea? And so,
I think there's like 1 million artillery pieces on the border on the North Korean side.
Right, and if you think about the fact,
that's a lot.
And if you think about the fact that they've been able to send millions of surplus shells to Russia, the stockpile that they must be massive.
Yeah.
And it's unlikely that the South Koreans have anything to match, because if they had, it would have already been sent off to Ukraine.
Yeah.
And so on every front that we're looking at, the forces of clown world are in trouble.
Yeah.
In the Middle East, Israel has not been able to accomplish much more than a partial ethnic cleansing of Gaza. They haven't been able to shut down Hamas completely. I don't know how they'll be able to do against Hezbollah, but I do know that Martin Van Creveld said that Hezbollah has one of the finest light infantries in the world. I don't think that the IDF has a great deal of confidence about that.
Yeah, as we discussed last time, it has changed a lot. The personality, the fighting spirit has changed a lot as well. It's not the same people as 20 or certainly 50 years ago.
Right. And
73 was different kind of people. And there were still veterans from World War II in 73. And certainly the West, as you say, clown world correctly, has also 40 years, or at least 40 years of taking down the fighting spirit of men, of putting women up on the feminine side of people on a pedestal. And you can't have war with wimps. And it's just a mismatch of logic.
Well, and the propaganda, it doesn't work the way that it used to. When the day after Pearl Harbor, my grandfather went and enlisted in the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
The day that Desert Shield was announced, my best friend and I went down to the Marine recruiters and attempted to enlist. We were quite fortunate in that the recruiter told us,
we don't need that.
Guys, the war will be over before you even hit basic.
Yes.
Thank you, but it's not necessary.
And I have a friend who tried to also, but he was too young to enlist after 9/11.
Yeah.
But now it's not going to happen like
this.
No,
but now, for example, there's a young friend of our family. He was actually arrested by the French government because they didn't like his memes or something. He will never, ever fight for that France.
Of course.
And the young guys that I know, they look at the ads that are coming out, because the U.S. Army is clearly trying to change its tune, because all the diversity and all the Africans and all the women suddenly disappeared from the Army commercials. Now it's all white men again, but they're not buying it.
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to see the numbers change at all.
No, you mentioned France. France can probably send an expert. Let's assume there is a war where France sends troops, which they already have specialists, right. And we know that. But let's say they send infantry, or because all the equipment has been used already, right. So infantry. Let's say they send 20,000 people, which is realistic. Ukraine is losing between 1,000 and 2,000 men dead, killed in action per day right now.
Right. It's pointless. It's useless. It's hopeless. I mean, the lesson of war since the Napoleonic era has been, don't get involved in a land war in Russia.
Yeah,
and it did. I mean, it didn't work for Napoleon, and Napoleon actually managed to get to Moscow.
Yeah.
Still failed. It didn't work for Hitler.
No.
Hitler didn't even make it to Moscow.
No.
Got within sight, but didn't actually manage to take it. I mean, we're not dealing with the brilliant generals of the Wehrmacht or the marshals of France. It
didn't work for Sweden at the time.
No, I mean Charles got
the 9th, 10th?
I don't recall.
Charles
the Great.
Charles the Great. In Poltava was kicked. Ended up the same attrition, and then one last battle, and you have to run away.
Precisely. I mean, the Russians are very what Taleb would call anti-fragile. And the USA, for all that it has been a historically powerful military,
yes,
has never ever, not once, fought a war of the type that Russia has spent centuries fighting.
Yeah, it could have in 1917, but it didn't last long enough because the German system was crumbling.
Even then it didn't, because Russia is used to fighting a defensive continental war.
Yes.
The closest that the USA has ever come to that was the Civil War.
And it was the bloodiest.
And it was insanely bloody, and it was significantly fought by floods of immigrants who were drafted against their will.
That's true.
And so,
very cruel war.
But the point is that the U.S. strategists have no experience and no knowledge. I mean, as a student of, General Krulak or Commandant Krulak and William S. Lind and Martin Van Creveld, I mean, I know what the military doctrines are, and none of them are built around industrial scale mass attrition war.
Yeah, it looks a bit like, you were mentioning before the media tones changed, and it reminded me in a different scale, of course. When Italy, 1940, started the war, so the Mussolini regime, which at least had won a little bit in Spain, a little bit in Ethiopia, but these were big wars.
A little bit in Greece.
In 1940s, bombastically said, we will win against France in a few days. Well, they didn't advance at all across the Alps. Germany had to win the war. And then said, we will crush the English in Egypt. They lost very bad, very quickly. And then they said, we will in Italy, we'll remember this because it was so bombastically, it proved it to be wrong. We will break the bones of Greece by doing war with Greece. And they were beaten by Greece and only the German in attacks. And this bombastic approach on one side and the completely unreal situation of the front, especially in a time of just-in-time communications where everyone can send images from the front itself, is incredibly counterproductive. And we've been hearing complete nonsense like, the Russians advance with human wave attacks. No, that doesn't exist.
No, they don't do that.
And they don't do that. Many Ukrainians do, but not the Russians.
Well, they did a bit in Bakhmut when they sent in their convicts.
Oh yeah,
I mean, but the point is, you have to pay attention to what is being used.
Exactly.
You know, I mean, most of the vast majority of casualties, and this I thought was interesting. There was a prisoner exchange, and I think 70% of the prisoners that were being exchanged, that Russian prisoners, were actually Donbass separatists.
Yeah, they're doing most of the fighting.
The regular Russian army is not even that heavily involved. You know, and people are saying, part of the problem is that when there's a war, you know, it's that it's like that meme. You know, actually, I'm something of a military expert myself. It's all of these people who have never paid any attention to war, to military history, to war games, to any of it. They suddenly become, you know, media experts.
Yeah.
And they're suddenly talking about it. And I'm not pretending to be an expert, but I am a lifetime student of the art of war.
You get to have a reasoning and logic in that reasoning as well. So
right, and so when you look at these things, like for example, back in 2004, actually it was again, Michelle Malkin had published a book talking about the justification of the internment of the Japanese people in the States due to the threat to the West Coast. And
what threat?
I know I pointed out that if you looked at the total number of Japanese transports, that there was no possible way that they could carry it.
Besides, there was not even plans from the Japanese.
They had no plans for it. I even asked I'm not sure if he was commandant already by that point, but yeah, he was. I asked the former commandant of the Marine Corps, was there any possibility of a Japanese invasion? And he said, absolutely not. They didn't have enough planes to do air cover for.
Yeah.
You know, he said, forget the transports.
Even Hawaii would have been wildly overstretched.
They looked at the possibility of invading Hawaii, and they decided that it was impossible.
Yes.
And that was the Japanese analysts.
Yes.
But the funniest thing was that.
Well, by the way, that internment, that was not even the rationale at the time for that internment. It was to avoid sabotage. It wasn't about invasion.
Exactly. It was to avoid sabotage. But it was sold, and Malkin was selling it as a genuine threat. But here's the funny thing is, so she writes this whole thing about the threat to the West Coast. She didn't even get the number of U.S. aircraft carriers correct. You know, she was, she left like half the carriers out of the equation. And that's the kind of quality.
It's a bit amateurish.
But to write an entire book and not even get the total number of carriers correct? I mean, that's just astonishing to me. But that's the level that we see. And Malkin, to be honest, is much smarter than the average media talking head. So you can imagine how abysmal that, you know, all they're doing is repeating the talking points that they're provided. And the talking points are being provided by people who have this very subversive, passive-aggressive, conflict-avoidant idea of war. If you notice, every clown world analysis of Russia involves, and then the people will rise up and drive Putin out of power.
And it was like this in the 80s. If there's a war between USSR and the West, it will last a few weeks. We will stop whatever advance or whatever they throw at us. Let's hope it doesn't go to a nuclear exchange. And eventually, Soviet people rise up, and it's the end of the war, and because it's the end of communism. That's a bit disingenuous and optimistic.
This is their strategy for Russia. This is their strategy for China.
And North Korea.
And I don't actually, in fairness, I have not once seen the strategy being applied to North Korea, possibly because they realize that even though they describe the other places, they describe the other places as a totalitarian dictatorship. But in the case of North Korea, it actually is a totalitarian dictatorship.
It is,
So
and
that-
a success,
so
and it
there's-
has succeeded.
And so there's no chance that the people are going to, rise up against the Kims.
Yeah.
And so,
But there's no
and-
chance
and
this
the
will
same-
happen in Russia.
and the same with Iran. So basically, their strategy is we're going to win the war by winning a battle or two, and then the other side will magically decide to get rid of its leader, and the new leader will not be more aggressive or warlike, because that never happens. Obviously, when FDR died, the U.S. immediately surrendered.
Of course.
And that's why Japan won World War II.
Mm.
The entire concept is an ahistorical fantasy that has
Where does
never
that come
happened
from?
anywhere.
Is that because the Nazis influenced so much the strategy of post World War II? Because they were also believing this, like with one more Wunderwaffen, the enemies will surrender. We will split them. And where does that strange idea comes from?
I think it's a confusion of successful subversion. Like, the U.S., or I believe they said the CIA was involved in something like 63 attempted regime changes. And
The one from last week didn't work.
yeah, but a number of them were successful.
A number were.
And so I think that what we're seeing is a clear indication that it's intelligence running the war as opposed to generals running the war.
Mm-hmm.
Because even though the generals might not have the experience of the type of war that Ukraine and Russia are currently fighting, they have enough understanding of war and what it is to realize that magically changing the leader doesn't end the war.
No.
I mean, look at the
Especially when the leader is a pretty soft, moderate, thoughtful, legalist guy, like in Russia now.
Like Putin, yeah. I mean, if Putin were to magically disappear tomorrow, Russia would become much more aggressive.
Oh yeah.
Putin is the one
And ruthless.
Yeah, Putin is the one who's like holding people back, telling everyone, look, it's under control. We don't need to, go to the wall. We don't need to
Mobilize.
We don't need to mobilize and invade Western Europe and all this sort of thing. He's being very responsible because Putin is highly intelligent and he's capable of thinking long term.
Yeah.
He's not thinking just about winning the war.
Yeah,
he's
because,
thinking about how are we going to govern even just the part of Ukraine that we've got. How are we going to govern if we end up having to take all of Ukraine? The last thing that I believe the last thing that Putin wants
is to have all of Ukraine.
Or worse, to have like Poland. I mean,
God, anyone. I like Polish people a lot, but no one wants to manage them.
I'm shocked that
who's not Polish.
I'm shocked that the EU wanted to let them in. I mean, it was just it was going to cause.
Yeah, but the
problems.
EU wants them in so that they can fill up Poland with Africans.
Yeah.
That's another story. But if I was the Baltic countries, if I was running any of the Baltic countries, I would be very quiet, very polite, and not attract attention.
Yeah,
and just in case someone else than Putin runs Russia, because those are doable.
Oh, yeah.
Because you can ethnically cleanse the Baltics in a week.
Yeah, I was going to say in an afternoon. But the thing is that Clown World always projects its own objectives on its enemies, and so China is not expansionary.
No,
in fact, back when the only time that they've invaded someone else, they invaded Cambodia in order to drive the North Vietnamese out.
Yeah.
And what people don't realize is that all of the Asian countries, Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand,
Australia.
No, but they were all begging Deng Xiaoping.
Oh yeah, right.
To do it because nobody else was capable of dealing with the North Vietnamese. And Lee Kuan Yew described the Vietnamese as being the Prussians of Asia. So they were always afraid of the military capabilities of the Vietnamese, which probably
And rightfully so.
probably the French and the Americans should have
Figured it out. Yeah.
taken a lesson from them. But anyhow, the point is that Lee Kuan Yew writes about it in his autobiography, and he talks about repeatedly begging Deng to intervene in Cambodia.
Yes.
And Deng was like, look, it's not in China's interest to do this. What interest does China have in Cambodia or Vietnam? It makes no difference to us. Finally, after getting lobbied by all the countries, China goes in, defeats the North Vietnamese, drives them out of Cambodia, and promptly withdraws.
Yes.
And the reason is that, unlike the Americans, and unlike the Jews who run the U.S. foreign policy right now, and also unlike the Israelis, the Russians and the Chinese have centuries of experience with empire.
Oh yeah.
And they understand in a way that most of us in the West don't, even the British haven't figured it out yet, is that empire weakens a nation.
Of course.
Going back to Rome, we can see it. Even going back to the
Athens.
And China.
Yeah, for sure.
In Athens, you had a very successful city-state, lasted for centuries. How long did it fall apart after they
very quickly,
empire?
in a century.
Yeah, and so that's why Russia doesn't want an empire. That's why, Russia already is an empire. Let's face it.
It is, and it's not fragile, but it figured out the right alchemy to manage. To be fair, a lot of very tiny people, which are eager, even during the Tsarist times, they were eager to be to send, for example, their best troops, their best sons, to be the guards of the Tsar. The guards of the Tsar was Muslim,
right?
The close guards, because for them it was honor, it was honorific, so they could brag, say, we might be a small minority in the empire, but look, we are important. Yeah. And so does the people, like, for example, the last 2 years, there were minority parts of the army, minorities from the Siberian parts, which are Asian, who were very proud because they were used to assault a city, or like the Chechens, in Mariupol, and they were very proud, and now they have like this badge of honor saying, we are the ones who took that city.
Right.
And they go back, and they're respected by the majority of Russians, in fact.
But the Russians know that they're not going to be able to do that with the Poles.
No.
Or the French.
No.
A lot of people don't realize, but I think it was Tsar Alexander conquered Paris.
Yeah, 1815.
And
14.
And promptly withdrew.
Yes.
They don't have. The reason that their nation still survives even after, the 70 years of the insanity of communism, is that they understand that empire is more of a weakness than a strength, and it's not a responsibility to be assumed lightly. Whereas with the British,
they imported the empire at home, so they can rule over the whole empire, but in London.
Right. The thing is that, like, with the British Empire, it wasn't acquired quite as accidentally as is often.
No,
but there is a fair amount of truth to that.
There was a method.
But it was also somewhat accidental, and it wasn't something that, like, the kings particularly pursued as policy and that sort of thing, because it was the benefit of technological changes.
Yeah, and it was quite efficient for a while.
But again, how long did it last?
Yeah,
Victoria was the first empress, and it was all gone by the end of World War II.
Yeah.
And so
1 century.
Yeah, and the USA is looking to be even shorter. The U.S. empire really began in 1945-ish.
Yeah.
And 2024, it's already ending.
So November 2024, Trump versus Dwayne The Rock?
I don't know who the opponent will be. Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, is one legitimate possibility. Gavin Newsom is still a possibility.
Not Kamala Harris.
I don't believe it'll be Kamala Harris. She's rendered herself, even. I think
drugs is bad for you. Remember.
Yeah, drugs and prostitution is bad for you. But I think it's not really that important who the candidate is. It's just a question of. But I think at this point it's pretty clear that Trump will be the official winner, and that he will be the next president. What we don't know is which metaphorical Trump it's going to be, and I'm not referring to body doubles. Is it the Trump who claims that he's going to root out the deep state and end the wars and all that sort of thing, or is it the Trump who brags about vaccines and says he's going to give a green card to every immigrant who graduates from college? I don't know. I don't know. I hope for the former.
Yeah.
But we'll just have to wait and see.
It's very hard to have a feel of what could happen in the next 5 months. Really, it's
because the possibilities are too broad. I mean, you could have anything from, a nuclear torpedo triggering a tsunami that wipes out New York, to the overthrow of the entire global financial system and a return to the global gold standard.
Something like that.
I mean, both possibilities seem to be about as equally as likely. So all we can do is hope. Hope, prepare, and pray.
That's for sure. And perhaps last question, because it's probably linked. We are just right now having had, or in some countries finishing, the European Union elections. Not that it matters so much for the policies and something, but there's a trend that is showing up both in England, both in France and other countries, namely that they are splitting into, for example, in England we start to see the Labour, who's becoming an ethnic party, not anymore the Workers' Party. It's more like the Union of the Damned of the Earth party.
The Diversity Party.
The Diversity Party, the Minorities Party, and in France we see 33%, at least the biggest party, being for me it's a central left government ideology, but let's say they call it the far right.
The former National Front.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, this is all something that I predicted back actually when Anders Breivik shot up those that
poor kids.
That political camp in Norway. A lot of people said, "Oh, well, this is going to put nationalism behind by 2 decades," and I said, "No, you're going to see politics continue to move towards nationalism, towards the right, etc., to the point that it wouldn't surprise me if in 100 years, if Norway still exists, that there's statues of Anders Breivik the same way that there's statues of William Tell here in Switzerland."
Yeah, I agree.
The people that become heroes are the people who do bad things in defense of a nation that survives.
That's true.
Americans to this day are proud of George Washington. There's actually a meme that goes around from time to time. It says, Americans, we will literally cross a river after midnight to murder you in your sleep on Christmas Eve.
That's true.
And that's George Washington, the father of the country.
Yes.
Certainly there's another perspective where you could portray him as
a terrorist.
Yeah, very homicidal.
And a traitor, of course, as the British were considering them at the time. Yeah, fair enough.
So
that's why the point is winning.
Yes.
And writing the history.
Yeah, the point is winning. And always remember, and this is for all the people who are prone to despair, those who show up for the future are the ones who determine it.
That's true. And Napoleon, one of the best sentences, he wrote a lot of amazing sentences. One of the best sentences of Napoleon is, the most important battle is the last one.
Precisely.
Thank you very much.
Always a pleasure.
Take care.